Well, jump in the water and catch a wave. It's time to ride the pipeline, the sales pipeline, with Matt Heinz from Heinz Marketing. Somewhere traveling in the world. Where are you surfing today?
There's not a whole lot of surfing going on in Midtown Manhattan.
Oh,
not much. Not that it's it's just we're nowhere near the surf. It's actually a pretty nice day. Yesterday was gorgeous. Today's pretty nice, a little humid, but always fun to be in New York City. Always fun to go home, which I will finally get to do tomorrow. But
and where's home? Boston or someplace? Or?
No, home is Seattle. I got to go all the way back across the country.
Oh, that's right.
The coveted 7 a.m. flight out of New York.
Better you than me.
So someone's got to do it, right? But no, excited to be here. Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. Really excited and humbled to have you here. It's like I said before, it's so exciting to see our listeners grow, both in the live program that we're doing here today, every week Thursday at 2:30 Eastern, 11:30 Pacific, but also on our podcast. Their subscribers continue to grow, both on iTunes Store. You can download us. You can find us on Google Play. We've got a lot of great past guests, a lot of good episodes to catch up on. Boy, it feels like we were just talking about the end of Q1, and here we are almost at the end of the second quarter of 2016. I can tell you, as a business owner and talk to a lot of VPs of sales, it is time to feel the terror, as many VPs of sales say, feel the terror at the end of the month, end of the quarter. Hopefully you've got marketing counterparts that are feeling the terror as well. If they are, it means you've got some alignment between what you're doing across sales and marketing. And excited, particularly for our guest today. We've got Sedric Hill, who's the author of Expert Selling, a blueprint to accelerate sales success. And not only is this a good book, and I encourage any sales leader, sales professional to read it, but I thought at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, when it's particularly important as a salesperson to keep a level head, to have a strong mental game, not only to bring those deals in, but to keep yourself focused. I know in talking to a lot of salespeople and having experienced this firsthand, it's easy to start to feel the terror, feel the anxiety, and let that kind of drive you and take you to a place that you don't want to go. So the mental side of sales, we're going to talk an awful lot about today, and very excited to have our guest, sales expert, sales trainer, Sedric Hill, with us today. Sedric, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Matt, for having me here, and I'm excited to join this wonderful program. I've been following a lot of your shows recently, and very impressed and happy to be a part.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Listen to that, Paul. That's pretty good.
Wow. We'll keep him on. We'll bring him back.
He's going to be on every week from now on. Yeah. Cedric, you can find more about Cedric online. I definitely encourage you to go to sales-blueprint.com to learn about Cedric, his team, and his programs. But, before we get into the book, Cedric, I wanted to talk about your unique approach, because you spend a lot of time talking about the mental side of selling, and I want to talk afterward about sort of how your book is different and really more of a blueprint than what you see a lot of sales books. But first, talk a little bit about how do you approach sales training and the mental side of sales preparedness and success.
Yeah, so and in my years of working in the sales field, Matt, 25 years, corporate, sales, and then in the training and development arena, I've really learned a whole lot about what really makes the difference. We all have to move from that sort of baseline of coming into sales to, moving to competency. But what happens from there really is very different in terms of the same type of development path. I started really looking into this a few years ago, not only in the field of selling, but really in virtually all of the major fields and domains out there, whether, medicine, music, and it boils down to the mind, right? What's between the ears, that cognitive skill development, really what takes you to that next level. And so I've tried to really sort of set up my consulting business and working with my clients to really hone in on that, because when I looked around, there's really not a whole lot out there that really focuses on that, yet this information is really what moves people to that next level through becoming good at something, to a journeyman, to that expertise level.
We're talking with Sedric Hill today, who is a sales trainer, sales expert, and the author of Expert Selling, a blueprint to accelerate sales success. And since you focus so much on the cognitive side of selling. I always wondered why more sales teams don't put a focus on this in their training. We tend to do a lot of product training. We do company training. We do objection handling. We do various sales skills. But why do you think more companies don't put a focus on the mental side of selling?
That's a great question, and I sort of asked myself that same question, and there's lots of answers to it. One of which, though, is interesting. When you look at sales training, for example, the whole model is sort of based off of either a department within a corporation, right, that provides training to salespeople, or many use a combination of outside training sources. And so think about that. The idea is everybody in those roles want to have more, training, because that's how they keep their job and that's how they make their mark. And so unfortunately in the internal corporate structure for many, too often what happens is they're focused on what we call butts and seats, just getting more people in the room to deliver training, and everybody's done their job, so to speak. So the challenge with it is that you don't really drill down to the individual level. It does work. I'm not suggesting that organizational training is not of value, but it has a place, right, when you look at the goals of moving organizational performance forward. But once someone reaches that advanced level of selling, typically the research, science, and everything else that you can apply, even your own experiences, you really learn through implicit, more indirect type of learning through your experiences. Most of the time we sort of leave that to chance and say, well, that just has to happen over 10, 20, 30 years and people get the experience. But what I've found is you can actually set the conditions, right, for that type of implicit learning and accelerate that process significantly. And the book tries to lay out that process so that people can, see where they are and move forward.
And speaking of layout, this is not a typical sales book. Like, I'm used to reading, and you probably are as well, you're reading books about sales and sales strategy that are really it sort of reads like a thesis paper. It's sort of like, here's the strategy, here's the overall approach you should take. And that's fine and good, but I think too often, sales, marketing, business books kind of leave you wanting for, okay, how do I do this? You call this a blueprint, and the book very much is a blueprint. Talk a little bit about how that's different and how the book is set up to help people sort of immediately start to operationalize the strategies that you employ here.
If you think about the traditional model of development that we kind of follow, it's really what we call a behavioral skills model. So we look at these sort of big skills, such as, for example, presentations, or learning how to handle objection, and some of those other types of major behavioral skills. Those, again, have a place, and you need to be able to develop those skill sets. And most of us do, right, within those first few years of professional development. The challenge is what happens after that, right? And I think what happens is we sort of reach that point of arrested development, right, kind of like driving. When you're a kid and you first get your license, you're really excited about practicing and learning to drive, right? But after we get the license, we kind of just cruise on for 30, 40, 50 years of driving with not a whole lot of additional development, right? And I use that analogy actually in the book because it's a really great analogy to think about this development over time, because if you think about how we approach our profession in selling, once we get through those sort of basic competencies, to move to that next level, we really need to really get inside of our mind and how we store information, what we call tacit knowledge, and then how quickly can we access that information. A lot of science and research out there really pulls that out in terms of differentiating expert performers from good performers or novices. And so in most cases, the level of information and knowledge is about the same, Matt, but the experts are able to access it faster and more accurately. So the idea is, how do you get to that? How do you develop your mind, okay, along with those other skills that we need as the basic part of selling?
So the book is written with a focus on the sales professional, but as I read this, I consider myself, we do work in sales, but I consider myself really more of a marketer at heart, but it spoke directly to me. It spoke to the way that I sort of manage my day. It's, I'm thinking about situations in front of prospects and clients myself. I'm thinking about just sitting in meetings and trying to sort of keep my mind as sharp as possible so that I'm able to sort of more precisely get to the message I want, to be persuasive, to be confident and focused Have you heard from people outside of sales that have been using this book and using the blueprint within it to sort of focus their mind as well?
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. In the second chapter particularly, the second section, right, which is chapters 5 through 8, we really get into this notion of persuasive communication. And when you think about it, the reason I get into that is, again, you notice I keep talking about research and science. This book is really formed and really draws from a lot of research and science. I wanted to make sure that I didn't just solely offer my personal experiences, which I do have quite a bit of experience, and that's a positive thing. What I wanted to do was converge that with, okay, what does the empirical research show? And so I did that, and a lot of what you see in business, the sort of window of expert advantage, in other words, what makes the difference between that expert and somebody just being good or competent, is really being an expert in communication. And so then communication is a big word. You say, okay, what parts of communication matter the most? So we lay out the 6 essentials of persuasive communication, and you're right. I mean, when you start looking at that, we sell or we persuade in virtually all that we do, whether, in selling, a business owner, in the training and development field. It's really a lot of persuading and communication that is the difference between being successful and less successful. And so the book really lays out how do you really understand what specific aspects of communication really make a meaningful difference, and then more specifically, how can you develop those areas to really communicate more effectively in your work and persuade, more decisively.
Speaking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with Sedric Hill, who's the author of Expert Selling, a blueprint to accelerate sales success. And although this book seems to be, appears to be written for sales, as we were just talking about, I'd highly encourage you, if you're in marketing, if you're in business development, if you're in any kind of role that requires persuasion and focus, and to be at the top of your game, I recommend you read this. Another, group of people that are listening, if you're in marketing, if you're doing anything in the written format, this isn't just about getting in front of people in the room on the phone. The seller mindset is not just about the seller. It's very much about the buyer as well. So if you are in a selling environment, if you're doing anything that is communicating with prospective buyers on the sales or marketing side, definitely encourage you to check the book out. You can go to find it on Amazon for sure. Also learn more about Sedric, learn more about the book at salesblueprint.com. That's sales-blueprint.com. We'll be back after some commercials with a lot more with Sedric. We'll talk about what's coming up a little further in Sales Pipeline Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be back to the Sales Pipeline Radio.
Whether you're producing a seminar series, users conference, lunch and learn, or exhibiting at a trade show, Validar has a solution. From capturing leads at trade shows to managing on-site registration, tracking session attendance, gathering information, and providing sponsors lead retrieval, we have a full suite of solutions for you. Since 2005, Validar has been turning corporate events and trade shows into better business. Call 888-784-2929 or visit us at validar.com.
In a world where the speed of innovation and change in B2B marketing has never been greater, the only thing bigger is the need for clarity, for a blueprint, for a guide to what's really working and how to make it apply specifically to increase sales pipeline growth, velocity, and conversion. That's what you'll find in the Modern Marketer's Field Guide, something you should have in your back pocket right now. If you don't, you can download it for free at HeinzMarketing.com. That's HEINZ marketing.com. It encompasses the entire sales and marketing pipeline, but in quick bursts with lots of specific, actionable ideas and strategies and tactics you can put to work right away. Like today, the loaded table of contents helps you narrow in and tackle a problem. Maybe something you're looking at right now on your desk, right in front of you as you're listening to this. It's also there as a resource that you can come back when you need something new to inspire you, to open your eyes, to give you some task or idea to do next. It's all that and more, and it's waiting for you free. The Modern Marketer's Field Guide at HeinzMarketing.com. That's HEINZ marketing.com. All right, I'll tell you what else is waiting is Matt Heinz and the rest of the interview.
That's right. Thanks very much. Welcome back to Sales Pipeline Radio. If you like what you're hearing today, we are going to have a full replay of our conversation with Sedric Hill on salespipelineradio.com. Every episode of Sales Pipeline Radio is available there. You can find a transcript of our conversation in about a week on HeinzMarketing.com on our blog. And if you're not following us on iTunes or on Google Play, definitely check us out there as well. Amazing past guests, having a good conversation today. In the weeks ahead, we've got some more great people that will be joining the show as we get into Q3, the second half of the year. Unbelievable. We are passing the hump day of the year here next week. In July, we'll be featuring Ardith Cleese, who was the recent author of a book called Spinach in Your Boss's Teeth. She is an expert at a business etiquette. If you are doing anything customer facing, inside sales teams, phone-based teams, she's got a lot of great insights she's going to share with us. Also be featuring Steve Richard, who is the co-founder of Vorsight. He has been doing a series of online events called call camps, where he literally will take a live call or a recorded call and have a series of sales coaches that will critique and break down that call, what's good, what's bad, what could be done differently. So look forward to hearing Steve. He is an expert on inside sales. He's an expert on just helping improve performance of sales teams. So got Ardith, Steve, and a lot more coming up on Sales Pipeline Radio. But today we got a lot more with Sedric Hill, who's the author of Expert Selling. And Sedric, I really like a lot of what you've written. The book is fantastic. Your approach to the mental side of sales is great. Who are some of the people that you have learned from and even continue to learn from? Who are some of the inspirations and people or books that you've read that you'd recommend other people develop as part of their sort of mental foundation of sales education?
That's a hard question because there's so many. I mean, I really consider myself more of a learner, a person that is so interested in selling from a developmental standpoint that sometimes I forget I also help train people and so forth. But I had a couple of very strong endorsers of the book. Brian Tracy, which is, really one of my heroes. I've learned from Brian for many, many years. We all know him as a sales legend, but the things that he really talks about in his messaging and selling and just really in success, to me, are so central to success. If you really look at a lot of Brian's work, he talks a lot about the mind and the psychology. In fact, he wrote the book way back 20 years ago, The Psychology of Selling, which is a very pivotal book for me in my career. Well, a lot of Brian's work is really, really key. I've got several mentors that have really made a major difference for me along the way in my development, one of which, Ben Wiley, I talk about in the book. My first sales job, I was a young green salesperson trying to find my way, and I watched this sales call that really changed my life with Ben working with a client. I learned that day, and from that day forward, you can actually smile and say no, right? That's what I learned mostly from him in terms of your posture really matters in the sales process. And so many more, Matt, that I can't name them all, but I think the main thing is that we really need to connect, and that's what's so exciting about your audience is they obviously value learning and development and getting the scoop as to what's out there. The last thing I'd say on that is when I started doing this research on the book, which was really several years prior to starting to write the book, I started running into this body of research around expertise and superior performance. And there's several very prominent professors out there in the academic world that have written a lot of great information and pulled a lot of wonderful research on what really makes the difference between people that are highly successful and others. And when I started looking at that, I was amazed, and I sort of was looking around going, other fields have really employed this type of information into their profession, but in selling, we really had not. And I was very stunned by that. And I started to think about, well, why not? And so I called these people up. Dr. Erickson, which is probably the world's leading expert on, guess what, expertise. Called him up, Florida State University, and I was amazed at how interested he was in not only other domains like selling and business using his information, his research, but he was really focused on any type of domain or industry that wants to really take this information and really apply it. And so I found others like that had done that with business, what we call natural settings research. And it's amazing. And I was just sitting there going, why aren't we using this information? So a big part of my drive for the book was to really bring a lot of this information into the selling profession, into the business world as a whole. We got
Sedric Hill today. This is great stuff. The author of Expert Selling, a Blueprint to Accelerate Sales Excellence. You can find it on Amazon. You can check them out at sales-blueprint.com. There's a difference, though, between sort of mentally preparing for what you've got to go do, and then being able to stick with that when you're in the heart of it. And so I think about either preparing for a show like this or preparing, like I literally am going to leave this show and I'm, presenting at an event here in New York later today, being able to proactively prepare for what you're doing. And then there's having the mental ability to react to what happens. The philosopher poet Mike Tyson, I think, famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Right.
So hopefully, well, actually, if you're in sales, you probably do, metaphorically feel like you get punched in the mouth a lot. But like what happens when you get into, a sales situation, you get into whether it's a live call, phone call, live interaction. I mean, it becomes a little bit of improv, right? Where, you're reacting to what the prospect says, to what the environment puts in front of you. What are some skills that can help people maintain their mental edge, even if it's not adversarial situations, just when they're faced with unpredictable responses to their preparation?
Yes, that is wonderful, and there's a couple of things with that I'll share. One is what we call this situation selling. There's actually a chapter in the book that talks about this, and one of the sort of other advantages that experts seem to excel in is this idea of situational knowledge, right? So a certain situation sort of arises, and usually we're all sort of caught off guard with that, right? But the expert can sort of navigate through that better and differently. What we find is the reason they're able to do so, and I share the story in the book about the famous captain that landed the Airbus on the Hudson River. We all remember that a few years ago. Yeah. And he was an expert pilot, but he'd never, of course, practiced landing a plane on a river or body of water. The reason he was so successful, though, in doing that is that he was an expert and he practiced different situations. So the mere idea of preparing for situations actually sort of is the mental muscle memory, right, that you develop your mind into preparing for, and then when those opportunities come up, again, you're able to access knowledge faster and more accurately. And so it's just a focus. In the book, I call it attentionality, right? By thinking about thinking, okay, you're actually preparing your mind to perform better in those situations. We think of selling as mostly telling and then the buyer makes the decision, but think about communication. You're making decisions throughout that process. They're happening in milliseconds, right? And so you really can train your mind, and we talk about that a lot in the book, how you can slow down that mental process by learning to actively listen, by working on what we call perceptiveness. That's the idea of interpreting, right, accurately what your buyer, what the other person is saying, the message that they're trying to get across, and then adapting, right, the proper response. As long as it just took me to say that 5 or 6 seconds, it's happening in milliseconds as you're engaging. And so you really want to think about that so that you can really get better, right, at that sort of process that's happening. That's the mental aspects of communication.
Well, it feels like a lot comes down to preparation and practice as well. I mean, I assume you're probably not telling people, read my book and you got it all figured out and you're just going to be great at it. But this does really take a level of practice, some discipline.
Absolutely.
It bothers me that a lot of sales teams will get a new set of messaging or get a new approach, and then the sales manager will throw them right back on the phone, right, without any practice that breeds comfortability and familiarity, which breeds confidence in what you're about to say and your ability to tackle those different situations.
That's so true, Matt. And in fact, I couldn't say that, you can just go do this stuff and be real true to the research. What they find in expertise is that in practice culture industries, meaning music, right, sports, medicine, where you really practice, right, and then you go off and you perform, like in a game in sports, for example. There's something called deliberate practice that really Dr. Erickson from Florida State that I mentioned earlier, he has really excelled this amount of research, this body of research, and really it shows this certain type of practice. It's not just practice. It's this specific practice, Matt, that's really focused on exceeding your current level of performance, right? So it's progressive. Then there's other scientists that have been doing this for naturalistic settings like business. And so we don't have a practice culture in business, although we still need to practice, to your point. But there are different things that we can do through our actual routine work, right, that allows us to still take work and use them as learning opportunities. And in the book, there's two programs or two methods that I lay out. One is performance-based learning, science-based activities that you can do as you do your work that helps you develop your mind in the same context. So you're doing the work as you do. You still have to make the calls. You still have to go out and qualify and do your presentations. But the way you're thinking about doing that changes, right? And then, so as a result, you're accelerating or speeding up that mind development that happens as you are building those experiences.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank our guest today, Sedric Hill, who's the author of Expert Selling. You can find more about him at sales-blueprint.com. So many great insights. I always feel like these interviews roll by so quickly and hard to capture everything. So if you want to hear a replay of Sedric's comments today, you can check those out in a couple of days at salespipelineradio.com. We'll have a transcript of the conversation up on HeinzMarketing.com as well. Join us next week. It is the literal last day of the month, the last day of the quarter, so we thought it was the perfect time. Next week, we'll be covering the way that you can internally do a mid-year pipeline performance health check. We're going to cover 7 different areas of your sales and marketing execution that you should be looking at to make sure they are fine-tuned and ready to hit the ground running beginning of July, beginning of Q3 to hit the end of the year. Great. So look forward to that next week. Got some great guests coming up in July and August. Make sure you keep listening. Find us on iTunes and the Google Play. Boy, that's it. We are out of time. It's time to stop surfing, Paul. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today, Sales Pipeline Radio.
Well, you can come back again next week and ride the waves with Matt Heinz and Heinz Marketing here on Sales Pipeline.